Hello, testing. Hello.
Altogether 但是 AV system 就可以了。你把那掌握好，因为那个就那个 Labor Day 他们那个是在那个5个人坐标，他们有摄像头，虽然我不会是吧？可以啊，我愿意啊。3倍速能行吗？我很骄傲。所以你知道怎么做是吧？那 Peter 他教了你是吗？还没教。
因为 VS 不会用到那些直播。
那我叫 Race 教你行。
你得问他呗，就是我们能不能用那些，然后就是要请 set up，然后告诉你。
行。是什么？是一个摄像头是吧？
就是我的 streaming。
那个 live streaming 是吧？行，那就过了 VBS 吧，过了 VBS 咱们再找时间，我对他那个。对，还得辛苦你买点那个水瓶。就是那个。怎么样？你们还好吗？是吗？你功课呢？
我现在暑假还在上课，但是就是开学最主要的。
要 in person 上课吗？
我上学前2学期都没有 in person，
下学期没有。
有一节课。
那你现在住哪？
现在在市前面，在一期。
那你怎么办呢？你开车去？
对，我1个星期去1次。
你1星期去1次？那还好。
专门选一趟这样
小日子过得怎么样？谁做饭呀？哦，就你就哦。
因为下班现在6点多了，然后回到家吃。6点半了，哦。去做。
哦。
咱们几时开始？我要邀请他们进来吗？对，现场有人吗？
是哦，你下次安排的那个，
可能还有人在录。
帅的小伙伴啊。对，那个Michael其实也是打篮球的好手，把他揪了。哦，他就参加。所以你们平常打球，他就过来。他好像在军队，再聊会儿吧。哦。没有，因为我房子都已经换了，就是那不能改。你给我删了？没有，他这个疫情会造成。
对呀。你认识医生？
哦。好像刚。
他也是应该，但我不知道呀，他可能也是加分儿。
哦。可以的。可以，没问题。来讲一段。好，没问题，可以的。你定好时间，早一点告诉我们算一个 Christmas 算一个小的 outreach， 有点长，可以用微圈来做。
他们跟你说了吗？那个他们想看到就是线上的人的脸，有可能就是讲。
想看到但线上的人都不露脸。
对，应该是。
但这现场人只要够多就行，够多就一样。
那有
我们线上人可能也不会太参与，就是说话。那就可以。
20个人可以去。
Did you get the email?
Yes.
Is this the camera for the room?
Yeah.
I have that on my laptop. You know,
It's very
same.
popular.
Yeah, the same Logitech.
So you're now working from home, maybe, or you're?
No, we're in the office. So I've been actually working since I got here in the office. So the executives have been coming in all the time. But we were probably running, I would say, 30 to 40% in the office last year. But in May, we called everyone back in the office in May. So May 17th, we're at 100%. So, and there with some few exceptions, but for the most part, we're back.
So you don't really, you're not those companies that will change fundamentally the way you work. You're still like targeting us full-time kind of on-site. Is that because of what your company does?
Well, I think there's always some truth to that because, you know, the Googles and the Facebooks and the Apples of the world, they want everyone to go remote, right? So they're telling everyone to go home because that's playing up their book too, right? So as an energy company, yeah, we want people to be driving and moving around. So that's part of it. We do want people to. But if you guys heard, there was a news article a couple of weeks ago in Dallas about the public school system. I don't know if you saw this article. You know how elementary schools get grades every year? You know, they get inspected by the state, and they're judged by their kids' results, test results, students' test results. And last year, had much lower, you know, kind of assessment scores for their schools, and they blamed it on COVID and the fact that they had to go remote and do learning that was outside of the classroom, right? virtual learning and all that stuff, and they said that math scores in particular, I think they're saying kids are 6 months behind on math scores because it's hard to do math over the phone, right, or over the video. So it's interesting they have that, and then you flip over to work and you say, well, okay, so if our students aren't learning as effectively as they should be when they're face-to-face as when they're virtual, then isn't that the same concept of work? Aren't we more effective in learning and productivity together versus virtually? So that's my view. Yes, we got with COVID, but we've missed out on what we can do together by being in the same room, having the water cooler conversation after the meeting, all those kind of things. That's kind of where I am on that.
亲爱的弟兄姐妹，然后朋友们，大家好，非常高兴能跟大家在一起又来一起，我们参加我们的海蓝华人教会的青年团契。Welcome to Highland Park Chinese Church Fellowship Saturday Fellowship. Right. 那我们开始之前呢，我们来一起先做个祷告。Alright, let's pray. 亲爱的天父，非常感谢您，让我们又聚集在一起，一起来学习您的话语，一起来敬拜您。也非常感谢您，让我们有一周的平安，对我们一周的看顾和保守。也请您能够宽恕我们这一周的过犯和罪。也希望呢，看顾以下的敬拜和学习的时间。以上祷告不配，是奉我主基督耶稣的名，Amen。好，那第一段我想分享经文的就是哥林多后书的5章17节，我想可能这是大家也是比较熟悉的一段经文。为什么分享它呢？是因为这个第一个是我就是信主以来背的第一段经文。另外的原因呢，就是它一直在时时刻刻提醒我，就是在我在过犯的时候，或者在犯错的时候，或者犯罪的时候，或者心里想犯罪的时候，都有一个提醒，就是神在我里面，然后我已经不是原来那个老我了。所以就是想跟大家分享一下，然后请大家跟我一起读。哥林多后书5章17节，若有人在基督里，他就是新造的人，旧事已过，都变成新的了。那我们一起来唱第一首敬拜歌《宝贵十架》。主耶稣，我感谢你，你的身体为我而生，带我出黑暗，进入光明国度，使我再次能看见主耶稣。我感谢你的宝血为我而流，宝贵十架上医治恩典拥有，使我完全的自由，宝贵十架的大能赐我生命。主耶稣，我夫妇敬拜你， 生命。主耶稣，我夫妇敬拜你，宝贵之家的救恩是你所立的约，你的爱永远不会改变。宝贵之家的救恩是你所立的约，你的爱永远不会改变。然后下面我想分享的经文也是很短的一篇经文，也是就是我尽量去做到的一篇经文，就是尽量去学习的一篇经文，是诗篇的34章第1节，我们来一起读一下。我要时时称颂耶和华，赞美他的话必常在我口中。就是我觉得虽然它短，但是呢有2个意思。第一个呢就是我们要时时的称赞他，怎么样称赞他，怎么样时时去称赞他，就是他要在我们心里面，我们要时时想着他。另外呢就是赞美他的话必常在我口中，就是我觉得我的理解也是就是我们要去多传扬他的话语，多传扬他的福音，然后都要赞美他。好，对，那我们现在来唱下一首敬拜诗歌《Here I Am to Worship》。有没有第一次就是来到我们教会的弟兄姐妹，或者很久没有来的，或者包括就想跟大家说2句的，都可以欢迎在线上线下都来 线上好像没有，我觉得we're welcoming new friends. Would you like to introduce yourself? Or we can. Okay, so so we're gonna save for the best. So yeah, we're gonna be formally introduce two very special guests later.
大家好，我叫 Chris。
Hello, Chris.
我是耶州的小朋友，我是在这里长大，就我中文没有那么好。
欢迎。还有吗？线下的有吗？现在在 online。好，那要没有的话，我们就下一页。好，就是有一些报告事项，就是像我们有一个中文的 VBS，在报告的当中，这个好像是就是帮助小孩子一个活动，详细的详情可在那个那个链接里面找到。另外呢，就是今天的话有8月7号，我们有讲员是 Tim 和 Janice，来为我们讲一些职场的经历，也是应该很有意思的。今天开始，然后8月7号也有，他们在业界也是有30多年的经验了。然后具体的详情之后我们会单独介绍。然后我们现在是一个月有2次来青年团契现场聚会，一个是第一个和第3个周六，然后线上是一直都有，然后我们也要为河南的水灾祷告，求主怜悯，然后医治，当然也要为我们的疫情祷告，还有为我们教会的常来的没有常来的朋友弟兄姐妹祷告。下一页，然后现在是我们一些日常的活动，周2的祷告会，周5家庭团契，周6的青年团契，就是我们今天这个。然后下一页，然后周日呢主日敬拜是9点半开始，然后周日的下午有4成查经，但是好像是现在是假期，然后之后可能会开始。然后周日的下午也有师母和牧师的陪谈，如果有什么就是想和他们交流的，或者心里有事情都可以找他们去谈。也就是这些。那下面我们把时间交给默默。
Okay, Tim and Janice, please allow me to briefly introduce you based on the information I was provided. Please allow me to say in Chinese because that's easier and faster, but if I say anything wrong, you will not know that, so that's okay. OK，所以我们都看到 Tim 和 Janice 今天是我们特别的讲义，其实这一周和下一周2次职场相关的都是连续的两个 topic。Tim 和 Janice 他们是去年8月份搬到达拉斯的。Tim 呢是在 Houston 长大，然后 Janice 是在 Galveston 长大。他们是在一个中文的Chinese Bible study. I don't know if they speak Chinese there, but 他们是在一个 Chinese Bible study 一个中文的查经班里遇见的，是在 UT Austin 的一个中文查经班，然后他们相遇之后5年就结婚。Tim 呢本来是一位 chemical engineer，他现在呢是在 Holly Frontier 一个能源公司做executive vice president and chief operating officer。其实他已经在业界主要是在能源的领域有30多年的经验，特别是在 operating在 operation 方面有30多年的经验，在很多很大的公司都做过 executive level 的这个 role。Janice 是曾经是一位 physical therapist， 他现在是在家里面照顾家庭。他们夫妻2人应该是搬过8次家，并且在2个大洲3个国家生活过。他们有2个孩子，一个男孩，一个女孩，儿子是 Jonathan， 然后 女儿是 Carolyn。Tim 和 Janice 他们是从小就信主的。Janice 在8岁的时候就接受耶稣为他的救主。在一个 VBS， 就是我们教会下周也会开始一个 VBS， 就是在这样一个场合里面。然后 Tim 是在5年级的时候也是接受耶稣。他们都是父母是第1代移民到这边的。然后a lot of information here.
Just make it up.
Okay, I'll just read through these. Really a lot of info, but I guess you probably will also do some by yourself. So Tim and Janice, they're all 3 generations of their family are Christian, who love the Lord. This legacy of faith was laid by Janice and Tim's parents and the first generation of Chinese immigrants to America. Janice speaks 她说一点的 Mandarin Chinese 和 Taiwanese。然后 Tim speaks only English, so 我们今天可以用 English 跟他们交流。然后他们是so they yeah I guess the rest you will say it by yourself. Thank you very much for your time for spending your time with us today. So let's welcome Tim and Janice.
Is it okay if we take our masks off?
Yes, try not to spit.
I speak a little Chinese. 我的名字是吴爽恩。Is that right?
你们好，师母问我不会讲国语，我说我的国语不太好，可以点东西吃，烧点自己豆 and 豆腐 and all these things。我的国语的名字是沈建军，我姓沈，3点水的沈，and that's probably most of the Chinese that I can speak is more normal conversation. I understand a little bit, but Tim understands very, very little. So it's amazing that he can understand my parents when they're speaking to us. They'll be going, Janice, blah, 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 blah. Go home. Blah, 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 blah. And he'll completely understand whatever the last few English words are interspersed, exactly our conversation.
So I grew up in a Chinese church as well, so did Janice. But so I'm used to hearing the Chinese going on, and even though I don't understand it, you can kind of pick up kind of what's happening. So that's no problem.
Well, thank y'all for inviting us. We're very honored that you want to hear about our life and our experiences and how God has been so much a part of creating the kind of life we have and the kind of people we've become. And so we're really excited. I see some familiar faces and some not familiar faces, but we hope to get to know you guys a little better in the future. Thank you so much for the introduction. I'm going to go through some of these very quickly. So you did a lovely introduction. Tim and I are in this photo. What do we do? We currently are here in Dallas, and I am a stay-at-home mom, like I was introduced, and Tim is working for Holly Frontier. This photo we had taken the vacation we had the summer before COVID hit. So it's quite meaningful because clearly no one's been able to go anywhere, but it was Machu Picchu and a bucket list item that we wanted to go visit with our children before they got married and took off. And so that is a llama that just happened to be in the photo. So we're very lucky that it wandered into this photo opportunity. How we were raised is I did grow up in Galveston. Tim grew up in Houston. And we were raised as American-born Chinese. As you can tell, Tim doesn't speak much English at all. I mean, Chinese at all.
So my parents speak Chinese to each other. They actually were born in the Philippines, but their parents came from the Fujian province, and so they speak Fuganese at home.
And my parents did Taiwanese and Mandarin. So our conversation would have English, Taiwanese, and Mandarin in one sentence. And so for me to be able to speak one language in isolation was actually a little bit difficult. English is my first language. I think in English, and I have to translate into the other languages. But we did accept Christ when we were very young. So if you guys have friends that you can invite to Vacation Bible School, that is something that actually Christ is introduced to children as young as, in my case, 8 years old. And I remember very clearly when the pastor gave his message and said, Jesus is knocking at the heart of your door. He just needs you to open the door and he'll come in. I felt Christ knocking at my heart's door. And I walked down the aisle and I said, I wanted Jesus in my heart. So that's a plug for Vacation Bible School. It is a great way to introduce your children to Jesus Christ. Tim accepted Christ when he was in 5th grade.
Yeah, and actually it was at a Chinese church retreat, probably similar to the one you guys are going to have at Labor Day. So it is interesting how, you wonder how these things work sometimes, and they do. They work, and we're not going to be able to make the Labor Day retreat this year. We highly encourage you guys to attend and pick things up.
So let me tell you about the photo next. It is the Go family. You can actually see our kids, Jonathan and Christy. They are newlyweds as well. And Caroline is, he's 26. Both Jonathan and Christy are 26. Caroline is 24. She's a second-year grad student at Texas Women's University. She's studying to be a physical therapist. She's down in the Houston Medical Center, and so she will be finishing up this year.
So they got married in December of 2019. Libby, when did you guys get
Oh, no. Hey.
Never mind.
Sorry, you in a bad position there.
But December also. June.
That's great. That's the COVID kind of wedding. I'm sure 10 years from now you'll have great stories to tell that come from that. And then we have the youngest is Tofu, who is our fur baby. He is 9 years old and he is a Shishon, which is half Shih Tzu, half Bichon. And he actually thinks he's a person. But what we want you to actually appreciate is that we are all Longhorns, 2 generations of Longhorns. And Tofu is also a Longhorn as well. All right, so the 3 big influences in our lives, and we'll just do this very quickly so you can get to know us a little better, is our Christian faith, our Chinese heritage, and our parents' upbringing. And I know that we probably mentioned this very quickly with the family fellowship when we chatted with them. We grew up in the church, in the body of Christ. Our parents accepted Christ as first-generation immigrants. And so we were taken to church all the time. Our parents served at the church. My father was a deacon, he was an elder. My mom did everything else with the children's ministry. Tim's father led the choir. His mom played organ up until very recently. And so we grew up serving in children's ministries. We grew up helping our parents and feeding lots and lots of people who came to our house. And so our faith was something that was handed down to us. But it was also something that we began to understand as we became adults, what it really meant to know Jesus Christ. Our Chinese heritage, was important. Our parents celebrated Chinese New Year, which was not meaningful to us because we did not grow up in China, and all the Chinese holidays. And so they helped us to appreciate that being Chinese is a very proud heritage, that you can be both American and Chinese. And when we grew up, we did face some discrimination, but it wasn't something that made us ashamed to be Chinese American. In fact, if anything, it helped us to actually appreciate our heritage more than ever.
I was born in Minneapolis. Janice was born actually in Taiwan, but came over when she was 2. So if you think about it, we were one of the first generations to grow up in America as kids, right? Most all the rest of our parents, they immigrated over. So we were kind of that first generation to kind of go through living here in America in the 70s, right? The 80s. And what I can say is, you know, there were oftentimes, thank you. There were oftentimes where I was, thank you, where I was the only minority or Asian in my school, right? In my class, I should say. And I think that's probably the same. Janice, she was growing up.
There were 3. The 3 of us went through middle school, elementary, middle school, and high school, and we were the 3 others. They used to say, raise your hand if you're white, raise your hand if you're African American, Hispanic, and then other. That was everybody else, and there were 3 of us. Myself and 2 other half Chinese, half Vietnamese students.
So it's funny because we got this Highland Park newsletter that comes out every month or whatever. And the Highland Park High School was recognizing all the National Merit Scholars, right, for the school. Half of them are Asian, right? So I mean, it's just a different world we live in now than when Janice and I went to school here in the States.
One thing we did appreciate is our parents never made us choose. We were either you know, Chinese or American. It was, you are who you want to be, and don't be ashamed of your heritage, but embrace what you think makes sense for you. And that was part of how they brought us up. They brought us up to actually work very hard. So being the first real generation of children born to Chinese immigrants who came in the 1960s, we were very poor, and we grew up working. So I worked in middle school and all through high school, bussing tables at a Chinese restaurant. If you've never done that, it's quite an experience. I got paid minimum wage, which I think at the time was probably $3.50. So working 5 to 11 o'clock Friday nights, I was lucky to make $20 that evening, all of which we put in the bank account and we never spent. And so I also had a second job. I was a tour guide. Galveston has historical homes. That was a more pleasant job, but it was still minimum wage. And so throughout high school and actually since middle school, I think, started working when I was eighth grade. We worked all the way through and saved money and worked and never spent. It was a concept of you work hard, you study hard, you save your money, and you do your best. I think Tim also bussed tables for all the way through high school too.
I bussed tables. I was a paper boy, newspaper boy. We don't even have newspapers anymore, but I was a newspaper boy back then. Worked in a department store and did all that stuff.
Advising people on what kind of linen to buy, and
Yes.
We didn't know. That's how it works. But the big 3 influences in our lives are Christian faith, our Chinese heritage, and our parent upbringing. If we could summarize that, what our parents taught us to do was to fear God, to love our family, and to work hard. And those are the 3 things that we strive to pass on to our children. We always tell them you must fear God first. You have to love your family, and that's not just the immediate family, the family of Christ as well. And then you need to work hard, no matter what. And so that brought us to our career. And I am not a physical therapist anymore, but I enjoy being a physical therapist. until I retired and had to be a stay-at-home mom and take care of the family and the kids. Tim started his career as a chemical engineer, but right now he continues to be a chemical engineer, but he also is mostly an executive in many capacities. I'll talk about that later.
So thank you for inviting us to come share with you guys. The topic that Will asked us to talk about is, careers and work, and, how do we navigate that both as a Christian and as Chinese. First of all, what Janice and I will tell you is we're by no means the experts in this. So, we can have a dialogue, we can have some discussions, but we're happy to share with you what we've learned and kind of what we're still learning. But by no means do we want to stand up here and represent that, we know what's best, right? It's an experiment. It's kind of everyone's got a different situation. And so we'll share with you our situations, and then you guys can, ask questions, so we can talk through that, as you wish. But what does the Bible say about work, right? So I always like to start off with a couple verses that just kind of summarize just kind of what the Bible says. I think you guys are hopefully very familiar with these. They're not, they're not surprising verses, but Colossians 3:23, it says, whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as working for the Lord, not for man, since you know that you will receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward. It is the Lord Christ you are serving. And I remember hearing that verse as a kid. I just remember thinking, okay, whatever we do, whatever we work at, we're going to be doing it for the Lord, not for me. And then the 1 Corinthians 10:31 verse, so whatever you eat or drink or whatever you do, do it all for the glory of God. We talked in the fellowship, family fellowship session about how, we're creating the images of God. We're trying to glorify God in everything we do. I think the same thing applies to work as well, and what we do. Our main goal is to glorify God, not ourselves, not our family, not anything but to glorify God. So the way we're going to kind of do today and next week, so believe it or not, you're going to have to listen to us again next week.
Oh, you're not listening to introduction.
Today we were going to talk about our careers and having Christ in our careers. And then next week we're going to talk about our careers as Chinese American and what does that mean? How does that impact our career? There's going to be some overlap. We struggled with how to split it up, so don't feel like you can't ask a question now or next week or whatever. But in general, that's how we're going to try to split it up. Okay. And what we'll do is we've got a few things we'll try to share with, and then we would love to just have a dialogue and open it up for questions and just kind of talk about this. So that's kind of the format. Everyone okay? All right.
And we're a double minority. I was thinking about that when we're doing this topic. You're a minority because if you are a Christian, you are a minority in this world, and then if you're Asian, then clearly you're a minority as well. So the first part is how to be a Christian in your career. And so I want to just share what I believe are kind of three main views to look at how to be a Christian in your career. And it's the W's: your witness, your work ethic, and your weakness. And so the first is to be a Christian in your career is you can be a witness. In Acts it says Christ is commanding the disciples that you'll be my witness in Jerusalem, in all Judea and Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. And so if you read a lot of books, it will tell you that the most authentic signifier of your Christian faith when you're working in whatever capacity is your words and your actions. And your words are simply that you just tell the truth. What does a witness is commanded or mandated to do is to tell the truth. Two verses that I really like is, this first one is 1 Peter 3:15. It says, but in your hearts revere Christ as Lord. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for your hope. that you have, but do this with gentleness and respect. And so we can tell what happened to us, what we've seen, what we've heard, and what we've personally experienced firsthand. And that's all you do when you are a witness. You don't have to have the gift of evangelism. You just have to be prepared when someone comes and says, why do you have a joy in your heart? Why do you act the way you do? Why do you do the things you do? That you have an answer for that. And you tell them firsthand why that is, what you've seen, what you've heard, and what you've personally experienced. You don't need to be eloquent. You just share what happened to you. The other way to be a witness is through your actions. And it's living the truth. Because you know, as Christians, the truth is in your heart. You know what the truth is. And then John White is a Christian author, and he put it in this way. He says you should be a signpost. So Galatians 5:13 to 14, the verse says, you, my brothers and sisters, were called to be free, but do not use your freedom to indulge the flesh. Rather, serve one another humbly in love, for the entire law is fulfilled in keeping this one command, which is to love your neighbor as yourself. That's the action, and that's the only command that Christ really has emphasized throughout the New Testament when he teaches how we should behave. And so a good signpost then points to the right direction. It's clear on what it is pointing to, and it doesn't draw attention to itself. And that's the purpose of the signpost. And so if you kind of think about that, in view of all the things you do when you're working, for myself, I've always thought when I was working as a physical therapist, how do I live the truth? Am I acting like a signpost? Am I pointing to Christ in the things I do? Or am I drawing more attention to myself? Am I giving people a reason to ask me the reason for my hope so that I can share them why I have hope? So I was thinking about if I could do something to give you an example of what's for me when I was working as a physical therapist, how I would tell the truth easily, naturally. So it's almost like I was thinking about it's like when I share a recipe with my friends and coworkers. Everybody wants my cheese grits. And if y'all come next week, I will make some cheese grits and bring it to you. I learned how to make this when we lived out in Louisiana. And they'll say, oh, these are so good. How do you make these cheese grits? And I'll say, man, it is so easy. Anyone can do it. Go to the grocery store, get instant grits. Very easy. Some eggs, some shredded cheddar cheese, a can of chili. That's it. And you just basically throw it all together in a casserole and put it in the oven, 350, and bake it for an hour and a half. That is it. And so simple, so easy. And so, you know, I remember someone did ask me one day, why are you always cheerful when you come into work? And my response, and this is, you know, to them, was that I thought that each day is a new gift from God. And God's love and his steadfast love for me is what actually helps me to enjoy every morning. I know his mercies are new to me each morning. And so whatever the day brings, I know that it's going to be a good day. And it prompts a conversation. That's all it does. And a give and take. And the more they want to know about the person that I enjoy talking the most about, the better that is. I know that one time I had a conversation with a friend in college, and she said, you don't actually believe in miracles. We were having, you know, a debate that you normally have in college. And I told her, yes, I do. I absolutely believe in miracles. And it's because the biggest one is what happened to me. And when I became a Christian and accepted Christ. And let me tell you about that. And so that's why I say telling the truth in your workplace, you don't have to be so, in my case, so worried about it. It's just a conversation. And the way I always have looked at it is be ready to give an answer for the reason for your hope. And it's just give and take. And the more authentic you are, the more readily someone's actually going to want to hear what you have to say. Live the truth. You live a life that's blessing someone else, points to the reason, driving to your attitude and actions. And I love John 13:35 because it says, by this all men shall know you're my disciples if you love one another. And I know that's really hard to do, but I always remember and remind myself that I can do everything through Christ who strengthens me. And so in everything you do, I try to think about that. The way that I treat my friends, my enemies, and strangers are the ways that I can live the truth. With friends, it's easy because that's easy to love your friends as yourself. This is your family. This is your neighbors that you actually like. These are your children's friends and their parents. These are your colleagues that you work with at work. The harder thing was enemies. And the verse that I always use and read is in Luke 6:27-31-36. And it says, but to you who are listening, I say, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who mistreat you. If someone slaps you on the cheek, turn to them the other also. If someone takes your coat, do not withhold your shirt from them. Give to everyone who asks you, and if anyone takes what belongs to you, do not demand it back. Do to others as you would have them to do to you. Be merciful, just as your Father is merciful. And I think this is the most challenging because oftentimes I know when I worked as a PT and also as a parent, it was really hard to love my enemies. I remember I would have to talk to physicians and they got the diagnosis wrong. They would send somebody down and say they had Parkinson's. And when I did my eval, it was not Parkinson's in my professional opinion. And to have them, yell at me on the phone and tell me I was an idiot, and, for me to have to stand my ground and say, I cannot treat this patient with whatever you diagnose them because I don't believe it's correct. And do that respectfully and be able to communicate that and hold my temper. It was quite difficult. But, when you think about that, that is the pride of man, and they don't know any better. And it's a perspective that allows you, I think, help me to hold my tongue and continue to be very professional about things. And then, I think one of the biggest challenges, and I think is like when our son played sports. And I know you guys are not married, this is not a family fellowship, but I remember I had to pray this one time he was playing baseball. Every time I had to go to his baseball game, and this is in high school, because I hated his coach. And I don't hate a lot of people. In fact, I can't even think of who I hate, but I really disliked this coach. And it's because he was unfair, unjust, arrogant. And when it has to do with fair treatment, that usually gets my goat. And he would say, I'm going to play the boys fairly. If your stats support it, if you come to practice on time, if you make every practice, you will get playing time. And this man did not do that with my child. And he was just someone I really disliked. And so it actually, it was hard for me to pray for him and ask God to bless him, because I really thought he was very, very irresponsible, not fair, unkind, and demonstrated very bad things to the kids he coached. But it's possible, because if you read God's word, you can do everything through Christ who strengthens you. And I hope that his family is blessed, because I thought, well, maybe his family, his house needed someone to pray God's blessings over them. And the last one was strangers. I love this verse where it says, Matthew says, you are the light of the world. Let your light shine before men in such a way that they may see your good works, glorify your Father who is in heaven. And I think that a lot of that has to do with the standard that you hold yourself to when you're working as a professional, when you're dealing with people around you, that they can see by the way that you talk, by the way that you act, and by the way that you treat other people that you're a little bit different. So that is how to be a Christian with your witness. The second one is how to be a Christian with your work ethic. You know, I think that because of Jesus Christ, we can work differently. And there's 3 reasons I think we can work differently. One is because we're a new creature. You know, 2 Corinthians says, if any man is in Christ, he's a new creature. The old have passed away. Behold, the new have become. The things have become all new. The second thing a Christian can do, and they can work differently, is because they're freed from the tyranny of necessity. You don't have to care about food and shelter, if you think about it. You know, you thought that you were freed from sin. That's wonderful. You are reconciled, you're sanctified. Those are all big, you know, Christian words before God. But what I forgot oftentimes is I'm actually freed from the worry of, am I going to be able to feed my family? Am I going to be able to clothe them? Because Christ promises us in Matthew 6:25 and several verses in the Bible, your Heavenly Father knows what you need. You seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. You don't have to worry about the birds, like the birds in the field, what they're going to eat. God will provide that for you. And that is the freedom that you have as Christians to not worry about that necessity of your life. And then the third thing is, I think that as Christians, you can work differently because we're delivered from the drudgery of work. And I like to say that the ache has gone from work, and we can enjoy working. And the verse I really love is Colossians 3:23 that says, whatever you do, do your work heartily as for the Lord. Tim kind of talked about that. The spirit, quality, and motivation that characterize all work that we should do is working as for the Lord. That was really important when I was bussing tables, because that was really kind of gross. But it's the idea of it's work, but I can have a different attitude about it, no matter how drudgery and how disgusting that is, or how much I really don't want to be doing this work. I can do it. And so keeping that in mind, what I like to think about when I'm working is this idea of this Christian work ethic. And this is what we've taught our children. We teach our children to be excellent for God and enjoy your life. If I could summarize the Christian work ethic in three main concepts. Be excellent. You've heard this verse many times. Whatever you do, do it with all your might. That is actually a very typical Asian work ethic. And that is something I don't think we need to work very hard at doing, because I'm sure no matter what your background is, your parents have always told you, you must work for everything you have. Nothing is going to ever be given to you. No one's giving you one thing. You work harder, you plan better, you do everything excellently, and you will be successful. The other concept is for God. You know, whatever you do, work heartily as for the Lord and not for men. And those are those questions that I used to ask my parents. Why am I doing this? Why are we vacuuming the church for the umpteenth time and we're the only people vacuuming it? There's no one there. You know, why do we have to throw out the trash? Why do we have to do these things that we find to be unpleasant sometimes? And, you know, they've always said, well, it's because you are called to work as for God. This has nothing to do with you. It has everything to do with God. And then the last concept I think that we have taught our children in is that actually God wants you to enjoy your life. You know, Solomon concluded that there is nothing better for people than to be happy and to enjoy themselves as long as they live, and that everyone should eat, drink, and find enjoyment in their toil, because these are gifts from God. And so, regardless of whether you see the satisfaction now or later, it will come. And so that's the Christian work ethic that we try to teach our kids. Be excellent for God and enjoy life. And then the last thing I want to touch on, this is the last of the what I call the Christian dogma, is this idea of weakness. And this is what we taught our children. Is trusting God in things we can't control. And especially with COVID and the environment we're around now, I guess when you go through your careers, you're going to realize, even though you're Asian and you try to account for every single permutation, possibility, you plan your lives, there's a lot you can't control. And in those times, how are you going to respond? And so, a couple of verses, 2 Corinthians 12:10 says, "Therefore I'm all right with weakness and insults and disasters and harassments, stressful situations for the sake of Christ, because I know that when I am weak, then I am strong." And the comfort is that you know the plans that God has for you. They're for welfare, they're not for evil, they're to give you a future and a hope. And you believe that because you know that God's thoughts are not your thoughts and his ways are not your ways. And so the concept of weakness is something that my children have a hard time actually embracing, because most Asians are very competent. You're high achieving, you're actually very typical high work ethic, high intelligence. The concept of not being able to control everything and the outcome, the concept of fairness and putting in getting your just rewards doesn't sit well in letting God control everything. And so I always tell my kids that, be careful of your pride. Do not be afraid of your weaknesses, but be careful of your pride, because pride says, if I don't elevate myself, no one else will. And that is actually something I think as a culture has gotten worse and worse as the decades go by. But humility says, if I don't elevate myself, God will. And, it's the concept of, look, you work with the Christian work ethic, and you trust God in your weaknesses, the things that you can't control, to take care of you. And I guess the question I always ask our kids when they have these struggles with everything from, applying to scholarships, trying to make the varsity team, it's like, do you trust God in what you can't control? Do you trust him in your weakness? And so I try to think about this, and I try to break it up into, in my experience, being a Christian in your career, in your work, really 3 things. In your witness, you can be a Christian in the witness that you do, in your work ethics, that will show, and in yourself personally, in your weaknesses.
Okay, so that was kind of the foundational type stuff we wanted to cover. And we're going to kind of shift into more what we call the application piece now, and just kind of talk about work and jobs and careers and all that kind of stuff. So how many people love what they do? They just love it. They can do whether you can work at your job for the rest of your life and you're going to be in hog heaven. How many?
Pastor and his wife.
So the pastor and his wife are the only two that can really
sort of a few hippies.
I can tell you, probably not very many people can honestly raise their hand and say that's really what they want to do. It's an interesting challenge because we go to work, we gotta make a living, we gotta put our kids through school, we've got to take care of ourselves, we've got to take care of our family. Work is a way to provide a means to do that, right? but it's funny how much of a struggle it can also be, right? I mean, it becomes routine, it becomes monotonous, it becomes very, I don't know, just, it's almost like slavery, right? I mean, you almost feel like you have to, every morning you got to wake up, do the same thing, go to work, do all the same things all over again. And, everyone's, anticipating the weekend, hoping for a couple of days off, and then you got to start all over again, right? It's kind of an interesting cycle. But one of the ways that Janice and I have tried to kind of think through this is there are jobs and there is a career, and you've got to kind of distinguish in your own mind what you're trying to do. Are you just holding a job, or are you just doing a job? When I was a paper boy, that was a job, right? That wasn't a career. That wasn't I wasn't excited every day to get up and throw papers every morning, right? But you've got to kind of understand what you're doing today. Is it a job like the paper route job that I had, or is it a career where it's actually going to take you somewhere that you want to go, right? And so it's a journey as opposed to a monotonous everyday kind of thing. So it's something that you're going to have to think about. And the slide that Janice went through, where it kind of said Janice and Tim, said physical therapist, chemical engineer, and it said homemaker, executive. That's kind of an example of, I studied to be a chemical engineer. Janice studied to be a physical therapist. That was our job. And when we first started working, that was our job. But our career, where we ended up moving towards, Janice, as her career, became a homemaker. And as a career, I became an executive. And what I can tell you is that those two had to go hand in hand. It would have been very difficult for me to be an executive if Janice didn't be a homemaker. We talked about that a little bit in our family fellowship, but that balance that we had to have at our home and with our kids was important, and it was more important than each of our individual jobs and careers. We had to decide, what is our job, what is our career going to be, and we talked about it. And ever since our first child was born, Jonathan, Janice basically stopped working and changed her career into being a homemaker, which, you can play that video of the family fellowship talk about, kind of raising kids. Janice is the expert in that, really. So think about that, job versus career. We'll have to talk a little bit about that. What I can tell you is my career started at Exxon. I was a chemical engineer from the University of Texas in Austin. We moved to Houston. My first job was a design engineer job with a refinery in Baytown, Texas, which is just 30 minutes away from Houston. And for the next 18 years, I worked at Exxon, and I had 15 separate jobs. Exxon had a rotation program where they just continued to, every 1 to 2 years, you'd switch jobs and continue to get, developmental kind of assignments. And that's what I did. Started out as a design engineer, then went to a wastewater engineer, then was a company products coordinator, was a crude economist, was a company plan coordinator. I mean, I could go through it. I was a process supervisor. Then I became, then I went into the Houston office and became a Gulf Coast products scheduler. Became a economizer, right? There's all these jobs that I went through. Department head, then went to so it's called a strategy executive. Went to Baton Rouge, Louisiana, went to Singapore, went to Dallas. This was my first time around in Dallas. This is now our second time through Dallas. Went to Edmonton, Canada, and finally ended up as the plant manager of the largest refinery for Exxon, and manage that job. At that point, I decided to change and leave Exxon. It was the hardest decision that Janice and I had to ever make. It took a lot of prayer and a lot of faith to leave Exxon, which at the time was the largest public company in the United States. It's not anymore, but back in those days it was. And we went to a company called Koch Industries. Koch Industries is the largest company you've never heard of. It's a private company. It was based in Wichita, Kansas. It owns refineries as well, which is where I've got most of my experience with Exxon. But it also owns Georgia Pacific, which makes Angel Soft. It makes Bonnie towels. It makes it's got a fertilizer company. It's got a Nista chemical company, which makes spandex, which is what Lululemon stuff is all made out of, right? So it has a lot of different other brands that you just never realized was owned by a private company called Industries. But I was there for 7 years, joined as the vice president of operations excellence, and for the next 7 years, I had 4 different jobs with Koch Industries, all in various vice president roles with various different companies. I like to say I learned how to run a refinery. I learned how to run a refinery in Exxon. At Koch, I learned how to run a business, and so entrepreneurial, very much of market-based in their approaches. Learned a tremendous amount at Koch, and it's because of that experience where I had both an operational background at Exxon, and I had the kind of business experience at Koch, that Calumet Specialty Chemicals came and asked me to be their CEO. And so I went to Indianapolis for 5 years. I was the CEO at Calumet. Calumet is a much smaller company than Exxon or Koch, but they were Fortune 500 at the time. They've now dropped out of that. But they were both a refinery and a specialty lubricants company. I had the one job for the 5 years, didn't have any other jobs because obviously that was a big job there. Completely enjoyed that. But at the, and we gave our lives to Calumet because there was a lot of turnaround work that we had to do there, and financially struggling. We had to keep Calumet out of bankruptcy and had to do quite a bit. There's, if you ever Googled, you can Google Timgo, Calumet, see some articles there. But Holly Frontier came and asked me to come join them about 1.5 years ago. Holly Frontier has very similar businesses as Calumet, so it's a main competitor. They have fuels refining. They also have specialty lubricants, just like Calumet does, except they're about 5 or 6 times larger than Calumet. So they asked me to be their chief operating officer. Came a year ago, so June of last year, so just a little bit over a year now. In the middle of COVID, which was difficult to start a new job, of course, in the middle of COVID. But it's been an exciting time. One thing is I don't have to learn a new industry because I'm already very familiar with it. It's a little difficult going to a competitor, but because it is a larger business and a larger operation, I'm having an opportunity to have a bigger impact and bigger influence on this industry because of the size of this company. And again, the idea would be, as I learn this company, and hopefully as I continue to prove and demonstrate my capabilities, that hopefully will continue to grow and expand and take on bigger roles at Holly Frontier. So I tell you that as a career because, we look back on it and, obviously we're all the different jobs, all the different things you had. And I can tell you that Janice and I could never have mapped this out in terms of what happened. We could never have foresaw what was going to happen. Both all the places we lived, all the jobs we had, and all the things that ended up happening in our career could never, when I first showed up in Baytown, Texas for my design engineering job, I would never have thought that this would occur. And sometimes you got to realize that God can be, it will be so much more creative than you can ever be in your careers. And sometimes you just have to trust God to be in control of your career. Right? And so remember there was a plan, there was a verse that we talked about. If you trust God in your work, He will make your plan. He will make His plans in your career. When I was in Baytown, it was I was in my second job, so design engineer to wastewater engineer. If you guys remember doing that.
Really exciting.
The wastewater engineering job was the worst job in the refinery. And as a young, kind of whippersnapper guy that I wanted to, have the best job, which was called the cat unit engineering job. And I was promised that I would take that cat unit engineering job, my second assignment after the first year. The technical manager at the time of the refinery came to me and said, "Tim, I know you want the cat unit job. I know we promised you the cat unit job, but we're having a lot of problems here in our wastewater plant. And the wastewater plant is normally where the worst people go, right? And that's why they're having problems, because they weren't doing very well, performing very well. They were having a lot of permit violations, and they needed a lot of help. So he said, we need to send, our best and brightest to this plant because we've got to get it. We've got to get it established. It took a lot of faith at that point, because it was like, wait, that's not, when I think about my son, we talked about Jonathan at the fellowship, family fellowship. He's a millennial. He's clearly, I want it my way, right? And just like a lot of the millennials these days. And I think about that back when I was going through that second job at Exxon. If I said that's not what you promised, that's not what you said, I'm going to leave, and going to some place. This my life, my career, this whole timetable would have been completely. And it's hard to think sometimes what would have happened. But in the end, Janice and I prayed about it, and we decided, okay, this guy, he's sometimes you go in maybe to something you don't expect. He knows my name now, right? And he knows he's going to be looking out for me. And if I make an impact and I can change things, then you can make your name for yourself. And so that's what I did. I went into the wastewater engineer. I didn't quit. I stayed with it. And turned the place, turned our performance around. We had good success. It was good. And the supervisor of my wastewater experience, his name was James Murray. Don't go looking him up. Don't tell him anything about it. But I can remember all my supervisors, all 15 jobs that I had at Exxon. I can tell you every one of my supervisors. And I can also tell you, I didn't like almost every one of my supervisors, right? But James Murray told me, as I was in my second year as the wastewater engineer, and as I was starting to think, maybe what I was fearing was going to happen, which is they're going to forget about me. I'm stuck in this wastewater engineering job, and all these people are in their cat unit jobs and doing all the great things, making all the money, and I'm here, unplugging the toilet, basically from the wastewater plant, the plant. And I started worrying about, did my fears come true, and that they're going to forget about me here. So I went and talked to my supervisor, and I said, hey, is this still the right job for me? Am I still advancing in career? And my supervisor said, I think you're doing a great job. Appreciate what you're doing. But you're never going to be more than a department head here at Exxon. And it was kind of like, that's interesting, right? Now he was a supervisor, so a department head would have been his boss's level. But he was basically saying, you're never going to get past this far. So don't be so ambitious. He was basically kind of trying to tell me, settle down, just do your job, and be like the rest of us, stuck in these jobs. And that was impactful for Janice and I, because we talked about it. It's like, well, maybe this was the wrong thing. Maybe we did the wrong thing. And maybe we shouldn't have come and stuck around, because now this isn't anything what, we thought. But a week later, maybe it was 2 weeks later, the same technical manager who had originally put me in this job came to me and said, okay, we're moving you to, basically promoting you to a, coordination job, an economics job. And from there, again, that wasn't that wasn't James Murray's choice, right? That was the technical manager's choice. But from there, the rest of my career kept staying on track, right? But I tell you that story because there were many times where early in my careers, it could have been derailed. And I didn't know what was going to happen. I never planned on a wastewater engineering role. But again, we look back on it now and realize how much God was in control of our lives. And sometimes you just got to do that. Sometimes you're not going to be happy with what you're doing. Sometimes you can't see why you're doing what you're doing. You're going to have to trust God. You're going to have to do, and you can go in your career as well. But I guess the lesson here is, don't always think it has to be the way you think it has to be. God to really take control and work through you the way He wants to work through you. If you go to the next slide, I started brainstorming. A lot of you guys may be millennials, a lot of you may not be, but I can tell you in my role today, I look at the millennials that are coming into Holly Frontier, and we have stereotypes for millennials, okay? And I'll just share them with you, because the more you can recognize maybe what some stereotypes are, the more maybe you can respond to them and dispel those myths or those stereotypes. One, and I wrote down 5 of them, but there's a sense of entitlement that we tend to label millennials for. And that's because just like our kids, when we took our kids through YMCA basketball camp, right? Everyone gets a trophy at the end of the season, right? We don't keep score because everyone's a winner, right? Everyone gets a trophy. And we taught our kids, and I really regret this now, but we taught our kids, all you have to do is show up and you're a winner, right? That's what we told them. And so the millennials are coming out of school with kind of this thought process of, all I have to do is show up and I should get promoted. All I have to do is show up, and then, and I'm entitled to get something, right? And what I would just say is, that's not true. I don't want, Jonathan's a very hard worker, but just keep in mind, there's a stereotype and there's a backdrop there. And you gotta keep that in mind as you're working, and you see your peers and you see kind of the new kids coming in, that's a lot of the stereotype there. There are winners and losers in business. And I know it's not popular to say that, but the reason people go bankrupt is because they're losers. And the reason people are, dominant in the marketplace is because they're winners. And everyone doesn't just get a trophy, right? Everyone doesn't just get a 10% increase in their stock price, right? The companies increase in stock price because of the value they're providing to society and their right? So it's just something that you've got to keep in mind. The second one is a stereotype about millennials being lazy. And again, it's not, this isn't true.
Saying it's wrong.
It's not saying it's
we are
it's a stereotype of millennials in general. And it's not willing to put in the hard work, not willing to, there's I want work-life balance. Work-life balance is a real issue, by the way. But for the millennials, it's so much of an issue, right? And I want to go home. I want to leave at 4 o'clock, and I want to go, out to Katy Trail, and I want to go, work out, and I want to go do all these things. I don't want to spend my life at work. And quite honestly, when I look at my parents, and I'll be maybe a little bit authentic here and vulnerable, but when my son and my daughter look at me, they basically say, I don't want to do that. You know, I don't want to be working those hours that you know, dad worked, or you know, that grandpa worked, right? Because we did work a lot of hours, and we still do, right? And so there's a little bit of a lashback against that of, you know, we saw our parents do that, we don't want to do that. And so it gets labeled as lazy. That's not true. It's just, there's got to be a work-life balance, right? And there it is. But keep in mind, as you go through that, that's sometimes that stereotype comes through like that. The third one is millennials aren't committed to the company. They're not loyal to the company. They job hop a lot, right? And so you hear a lot of people like, you know, I think about my experiences when I moved to that wastewater engineering role, and I kind of mentioned, if I were doing that today, I probably would have changed jobs. I probably would have said, you know, the heck with this, I'm not going to stick around for this. I'm going to go find another job. And I think a lot of millennials are doing that today. And part of that's because the unemployment rate is so low that they can do that, right? You don't have to put up with something you don't like. You just change jobs, go somewhere else, start over. In some cases, that's good. I will tell you, in some cases, it's the grass is always greener on the other side of the fence, right? And it's not true. People get over it. When I was at Calumet several times, we lost some millennials, and within a year or two, they came back, and they said, "Well, it wasn't quite what we thought. We didn't realize we had it so good, right? And so we want to come back." And so, you know, we would let them come back, but it's the grass is always greener. Don't always think that that the other side is better than what you got. Kind of a bird in the hand thing. Short attention spans. So our kids live in the age of video games and fantastic computer graphics, right? And CGI in movies and everything, right? So attention spans are hard to keep, right? Because we've entertained our kids so much. You know, our kids were the ones who got all the VHS videos, and when you're driving in your car, you know, you had the videos in the car seats and all that stuff. I mean, when we were that age, right? You sat in your car and you looked out the window and you played card games, right? You played license plate games. You did things that I Spy games, right? Today everyone's playing on their Game Boys and all these things, right? Nintendo Switches and all that, phones, right? Exactly. So we do live in an environment where the attention spans are tougher and written communication skills are harder, right? So, you know, no more texting and, you know, whatever the 42 characters, whatever it is. You know, you actually have to write a cohesive, you know, paragraph, you know, and that's a different kind of phenomenon than what, you know, some of our kids and millennials have gone through. So that's another stereotype. And then finally, no school hard knocks. Some kids we hear not willing to pay their dues at work. And I will say that as a kind of resentful, baby boomer type generation. You know, we went if the company said, you know, go move to Indonesia, we moved to Indonesia, right? If the company said you're going to be the wastewater engineer, we became the wastewater engineer, right? They said jump, we said how high, right? It was that kind of thing that you know, my generation grew up in. Whereas the millennial generation today, it's not that way, right? The company says jump, and the millennial will say, I don't know, I'm not sure I want to do that, right? And so that perception, though, is viewed as not willing to, you know, put in the hard work and earn that promotion or earn that raise, as opposed to being entitled to that raise or being entitled to that promotion. So I just wanted to brainstorm those just to kind of give you some food for thought. It helps sometimes to understand these perceptions to better communicate and understand and talk to your bosses and your management. So next slide is So a few tips for a successful career. I think we only have a few more slides left and we can turn over to Q&A. But here is my thoughts on some tips for a successful career. First one is focus on the results, not the activities. And the reason I say that is one of the main things I see as the COO here at Frontier is the people that are successful are the ones that are truly focusing on getting the results for the company. The people who are less successful are the ones who are focusing on checking the box on activities or processes that they're completing, but not necessarily getting the results. And so, for example, safety is a big issue for our industry. We're always wanting to make sure that people aren't getting hurt. We're trying to maintain our safety record. Someone who's focusing on the activities would be someone who would be rolling out a new, hand injury guideline. Someone who's rolling out a new process or a new standard or procedure that says we're going to require special gloves for those people who are out there working in the field. And I'm going to roll out this standard. They roll it out, check, I've done it, and they want, at the end of the year during the year-end appraisal, they say, look at all the good things I did. I rolled out this standard. Look at me, I've done good. Instead, they should be looking at, did the safety of this plant actually improve or not improve this year? And if by rolling out that hand procedure standard helped lower the safety injury rate, then you should feel very good about that and feel very proud and be rewarded for that. But if it didn't, and in fact, if the safety rate got worse, then you really got to think about, well, that activity could have been helpful. It's not saying it's not helpful, but it's not hitting the bottom line, right? It's not getting the results. It's very important for people to be able to distinguish the activities that they're doing versus the results that they're trying to affect or obtain. And the best performers are the ones that can identify what needs to be done so that they're focused on the right activities that then generate the improved results. It's like basketball, right? I always liked it. The analogy of basketball. Janice talked about sports as well. We talked about sports and family fellowship. But, when you're playing a basketball game, it's very clear who's winning and who's losing, right? You got a scoreboard, you got points. It's really clear. Did I make the basket or did I miss the basket, right? Did I make two? Did I make three? At the end of the game, who won, right? So when we talk about the YMCA league, they used to turn off the scoreboard, right? Because it was so obvious, when kids were getting beat, right? So, we better turn off the scoreboard. And yet, the ambitious kids were still keeping score on the bench, right?
They knew the scores.
They knew what was going on. Unfortunately, it's not as clear in our work, but it should be, right? We should be able to know as clearly, are we winning? Are we losing? Are we getting the end results? Or are we not getting the results? It doesn't matter how many turnovers you have. It doesn't matter how many rebounds you have. It doesn't matter how many assists are going on. I mean, those are all helpful stats. Don't get me wrong. It helps to know what that's in your game, and your coach needs to analyze that to figure out what moves he needs to make. But in the end, if his team wins in rebounds, wins in assists, wins in lowest turnovers, but loses the game, it doesn't matter, right? The coach still lost the game. And that's the kind of mindset we got to have at work. And that the best employees are the ones who can really see that clearly, what's winning, what's losing, and focusing them on efforts and activities on trying to get that win. Okay, so that's the first point. Second point, it's about the team, not the individuals. So throughout school, especially as Asians, throughout school, we have been taught to do our own work. We have been taught, don't look at other people's papers, don't cheat, don't call anyone else. You've got to do your own work. And I'm going to grade your paper
on what your work is. That goes all the way through college. Now, colleges and even high schools are trying to do more team activities, but it's so funny because, at least when we saw Jonathan and Caroline coming through school, they do team activities, but, the parents would always complain because it was like, well, it's no fair because, my son's doing all the work and these other kids are not doing any work.
Is doing all the work.
And so how can you give him the same grade? Because, he's doing all the work and this guy's just getting a free ride, right? And so that always breaks down. And so then they're, okay, we see that, we'll give this guy a better grade and this guy less than grade. In the end, in the work world, there are no individual grades. It's all about the team environment and what the team can do. It has nothing to do with the individual stats. So you can have guys at work who are, just knocking it out. They're doing great research. They're doing, they're doing great things. But if their ability to make the rest of their employees and groups better is not effective, then it really doesn't matter. We don't give individual A's. The stock price of Holly Frontier isn't based on my individual performance, right? It's based on what the company can do as a whole. And so, there's a stat in basketball. We like to talk about basketball. There's a stat about points gained versus points lost when a certain person is on the court, right? Have you guys heard that stat? So you can watch, Kevin Durant was playing today, for those of you guys who watch the USA basketball team. And they always, it's easy to see Kevin Durant, he scores a lot of points. He's a great player, he went to the University of Texas. So he's a really good player. But what's more important is they've got these stats that say when he's on the court, when he's not on the bench, but when he's on the court, the team outscores the other team by, whatever, 7 points or whatever the stat is. That's points gained versus points lost. And people like, I don't know if you guys remember, this is dating myself, but Allen Iverson was a point guard with the Philadelphia 76ers. He was a great player, scored a lot of points. Westbrook's a little bit like this, in my opinion, but scores a lot of points. But when he's on the court, his team loses, right? His team, because he's trying to dominate, he's trying to hog the ball, he's trying to do everything himself. He's not able to take advantage of the other four members of the team. And it doesn't matter what your individual stats are if your points gained versus points lost is losing when you're on the field, right? And so that's why it's about team and not the individuals when you're at work. Do you help your team get the results, right? That's really what it's all about. And I can tell you, and it's not true in all cases, but most supervisors can see that. They're not, they appreciate individual contributions and hard work. By all means, they see that, but they can tell when people are working together as a team and who's not. And it becomes quite apparent. There are injustices in the world where you see some of those people like the Westbrooks and the Allen Iversons who hog the ball all the time. And so sometimes they get away with it, but they don't get away with it for very long, right? In the end, the team impact will catch up to it. Communicate is the third one. I like to tell Jonathan this. You can be the smartest person in the room. You can know exactly what the right answer is. But if you can't convince your coworkers that that's the right thing to do, it doesn't matter and it's ineffective, right? So you can think you have the right answer, but if you can't convince and persuade your team members to believe or to align with that idea, then it doesn't matter. And you can go home and you can sulk and you can say, see, I told them they should do that. I told them that was the wrong thing, and you can complain and you can blame, them. But in the end, if you're not able to communicate and express, why you want to do something, why it's the right thing, then it doesn't matter if you have the right answer or not. And that's where communication comes in. It's something that we as Asians, we have underestimated our whole lives. We can do our math, turn it in. We can write our science papers. We can turn them in. We can do all that and get away with it as individuals in our school system. But when it comes to work, when it comes to actually interacting and getting that team dynamic going and aligning people around an idea, rallying them around a cause, we just don't have that experience. We just don't have that skill set. That's why I said at the family fellowship, team sports, getting your kids involved in team sports early will help them develop those skills. It's so important. And the one thing I will tell you that I see most in executives, as I see different executives at different companies, is they all don't. In fact, I would say the least correlated variable is the school that they went to for college. Very few of these executives actually went to an Ivy League school. I will just tell you. It's just not, that's not the skill set that gets you to be an executive of an organization. The most common attribute that I see is that these guys and gals who make it to the top all excelled in some team sport where most of them, quite honestly, played at the collegiate level. I never played at the collegiate level, but I played in high school, and I played, all the sports in high school, and that helps. I can just tell you, it really helps. It helps you do a couple things. It helps you lose and know how to lose, because when you're playing team sports, you lose, and you've got to be able to accept that and understand how know why you lost and to try to get better from that loss. We send our kids to, robotics and math contests and science fairs, and they really don't lose, and they really don't ever face that adversity of failure. And you hear a lot of stats. Brown University used to quote, that I think Brown is the #1 suicide school in the United States. It's because what they've determined is all their kids, they go to the university. It's a very competitive Ivy League school, right? They've never failed before, and when they face failure at the collegiate level, they don't know how to handle it, and many of them take their lives as a result. We have to teach our kids how to fail. We got to let them learn how to do that, because that's what life is about, and that's what work is about. We're not going to win it. We're going to fail. Respect is earned, not given. So a lot of the times, if you think about that, I used to think a lot of times, I deserve this. I deserve this. I deserve this. I deserve this promotion. I deserve this raise. I deserve this assignment. And there's truth to that. I don't want to say there's not, but promotions, raises, assignments, they're earned. They're not given, right? And so I just want to say there's two sides to the story. There are examples where decisions aren't done correctly, but for the most part, you've got to earn it to be given it. And so if you're not getting what you want, you've got to be thinking, what am I not doing to earn that spot? And there's some discrimination, there's some bias. So we got to deal with that. We got to deal with that. But for the most part, you got to really just challenge yourself. What results am I not getting, which is not allowing me to get the job or promotion assignment that I want. And the last one is learn from your mistakes. Don't just wish they didn't happen. And that just kind of goes back to, we got to learn how to fail and learn how to get back up. There's all those stories about Abraham. But in the end, the last tip for success is what I would say is what are you trying to do? What is success? What you got to understand what success means to you. You've got to be able to understand what you're trying to accomplish. Because remember in the verses that we just talked about, it's about bringing glory to God. It's not about bringing glory to men. And if you think about many of the reasons why we're unhappy at work is because, I want more money, I want more responsibility, I want more respect, I want more power, I want more, food, I want more vacations, I want more boats, I want more toys, right? It's I want. What is success at work, right? Is it to feed what I want, or is it to feed what God wants, right? Is it bringing glory to me, or is it bringing glory to God? I mean, that is the ultimate success tip that I can leave you with is, what are you trying to accomplish? Because you're going to get frustrated, I can guarantee you, if it's more to satisfy what you want. You'll be fulfilled if it's to satisfy what God wants. So, the last slide that we have is what I call a food for thought slide. And it's kind of just puts what I just said in perspective. Okay. Why does God want us to, what I call, quote unquote, toil? Because in the Bible uses the word toil a lot when they're talking about work and toiling in the land, right? And in Genesis, Adam and Eve just ate the fruit from the tree of knowledge, and the punishment for doing that is separation from God, right? That's, you cast away from the Garden of Eden, and as they're being cast away, God says, cursed is the ground because of you. Through painful toil, you will eat food from it all the day of your life. Work, toil, getting food on the table, providing resources, providing for our family, providing for our lives, that is the consequence of our sin nature. That is the consequence of us sinning against God and being separated from God. The curse is we will be frustrated trying to work and earn a living. No more do we have the Garden of Eden, where all we have to do is pick the fruit from the tree and never have a care in the world. We lost that because of our rebellion against God. So the second verse, Proverbs, this is Solomon saying, commit your work to the Lord and he will establish your plans. It's a way of saying, that is what happens when we sin against God. But God doesn't want us to be toiling. He doesn't want that to be our destiny. He wants us to be fulfilled. He wants us to be reconciled to him. If we can commit our ways to the Lord and our work to the Lord, God will establish our plans. He will establish our career. He will take the toil out of work if we can commit it back to him. It's the reconciliation effort that we need to have back to God. The last verse in Ecclesiastes, this is Solomon again. There is nothing better for a person than that he should eat, drink, and find enjoyment in his toil. And so Solomon, after all his, you guys know the story, after all his wealth, after all his wisdom, after all his accomplishments and power, he had it all, right? Solomon, if there's one person in the world who had it all, Jeff Bezos, that time, that was Solomon. And yet Solomon, proclaims in Ecclesiastes, vanity, it's all vanity. It doesn't matter. It's worthless. It doesn't mean anything. And instead he says, the true meaning of life is to have nothing better than to eat, drink, and find enjoyment in his work. That's what Adam and Eve had in the Garden of Eden before they ate from the fruit of the tree of knowledge. And what God is trying to do is he's trying to say, you don't have to live in that state anymore. We want you, when he sent Christ to come die for us, it reconciled us back to God so that we no longer have to live in that state of toil and frustration anymore if we can trust God and if we can glorify God. So my comment is, when you're going to work and you're dreading going to work and you're up at 6 a.m. and trying to make your way back to work again, you got to remember, why am I dreading work? I'm still living in this, what I call this world of slavery to sin, when instead I should be reconciled to God and living in this world of salvation. And it's a reminder, God, he's got humor, right? He does this on purpose so that every day that we're struggling at work, we can be thinking, this is what happened with Adam and Eve, but we don't have to live like this anymore if we trust God and bring him into our lives. So it's about salvation. It's not about ourselves. So, okay, so with that, hopefully that made some sense. What we thought we'd do is just open it up for some questions.
We had some set questions, but I'm sure that we would like to take your questions.
We'll give you a chance to.
We'll give you a chance first.
We'll give you a chance to the live audience. This is, we want to give privilege to the people in the live audience to ask any questions first. But if there are none, or if we run out, then we'll go to the questions that have been submitted at the time. Yes.
My question is, I face a lot of, I'm not sure, maybe it's just me. I face a lot of problems about like social behaviors in the company. For example, if I tell boss something about my colleague, will my colleague thank me? Or something like, if I argue with the boss, the boss thank me. So there's always something like this sitting in my mind. So what's your opinion?
So it's a good question for those online. It was, how do we interact with our employees and with our supervisors? Sometimes if I say what I really mean, will that backfire on me? I think is maybe the question. Will they respond in a positive way or a negative way if I try to talk about issues or talk about things with my coworkers and my boss? Is that kind of the question? It's obviously it's a individual situation. There are bad actors who are out there who can't be trusted, or who are going to make things worse. You got to be careful. You got to watch out for those different things. But in general, what I would say is, in general, you have to be professional. Sometimes you can't just say what you think. You've got to be able to say it in a way that sometimes is not as direct as you want to be, but still provides input and feedback back to people. I know some people who are very good at being very direct. And if you do something that makes them mad, or you do something that bothers them, they'll just snap right at you and just say, hey, what are you doing? That's not cool, man. And sometimes they can get away with it because they're able to work through that. And I know other people that try that and they come across as being, disconnected and doesn't understand what's going on, and backfires and makes it worse. So you've got to kind of understand how this is where communication comes in. You've got to be able to develop relationships with people. But what I would tell you, and I tell this to all of my employees, you got to build trust and credibility with your supervisor and with your employees. And if you don't have trust and credibility, you'll never be able to have those kind of discussions that go on. And you can't just You can't just hope, when there's a crisis, then I'll try to build trust and credibility. You've got to be building that relationship, through time, so that when those awkward situations come up, you can then speak your mind and have a good conversation with either your boss or your coworkers, and they can understand because they trust you and because they've got credibility with you. They can listen to what you have to say and do that. If you don't have that built first, it'll generally come across poorly, is what I would say.
And I just have one thing to add is, when we went through Tim's career, it was basically my career. When we had problems like the very first supervisor who told Tim he wasn't going to get any higher than department head, you already know that you have an enemy that is not going to be your supporter. You can't control that. He's your supervisor. What can you do? Well, we prayed. I think that prayer is often underrated. I think when you ask God for wisdom, he won't give it to you. When you say, I don't know what to do with this situation, I'm out of control. It's out of my control. I feel an injustice has been done. I don't know how to fight that. We would pray about it, and we'd ask God to give us wisdom and to provide a path forward. You don't know what that is, but when you honor God, he will honor you. And that's, I think, something that I forget all the time. And so in all these circumstances, I know that Tim and I often just prayed, and we prayed for the person that we despise the most. And it's the hardest thing in the world to do. You don't want to pray for someone you dislike. It is so hard, and you have to drop your pride. But I think that God will honor you when you ask him to give you wisdom on how to address the situation. And then we also ask for advice from the people we trust the most. So Tim would often call his father. As old as we are, we're still calling our parents. And thank the Lord, they're still with us and saying, in a way, have you ever been in this situation? What do you think I should do? The people you trust the most, they know you well. They want the best for you. And I know many situations where I wanted to do something, everyone else around me told me not to just let it go. I had an issue with a mom when I was organizing volunteer events, and Tim, my mom, some of the other moms said, just apologize. And I'm like, I didn't do anything. I am not going to apologize for something I didn't do. That's admitting that I was wrong. And they said, just apologize. Do it. And I did. And at the end, she said, you know what, I probably misread that communication. I'm glad you apologized first. I'm going to apologize as well. And I would never have thought she would have done that because she's an attorney. But it's those things that had I hung on to my sense of this is what's righteous, and I did not do anything, but because I asked for the opinion of the people I trusted, if the consensus is do this, then perhaps God is helping you in your pride to, do something. So those are two things that we know we do a lot.
Good question. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess the question is, how can Christians bring glory to God and be salt and light when we face a lot of politics going on in the office, and how can you make your boss feel comfortable, have you on team, but also you're not getting your way of being a Christian.
So for those online, how can you truly be show Christian values? How can you truly be a Christian at work? And in today's world, how can that be effective? Is that kind of the right thing? Yeah, I remember when I first started work, whatever it was 30 years ago now. We would have lunch in kind of the lunchroom or lunch cafeteria, and we would actually, I would actually say grace before lunch. And it was, I don't know what people do today, but at the time, that was a it was noticeable because you're talking and then all of a sudden someone's saying grace before lunch. And that was just a subtle way of just, I wasn't out there telling people, look at me, I'm a Christian and things like that. But it was just a subtle way of trying to exercise my faith, without being pushy. You don't want to, if you come across as being evangelical at work, you'll probably get the opposite reaction of what you want, right? But you're going to have to be subtle, and you're going to have to help people understand what you believe and what your faith is. The other thing is, you'll see people, you walk in someone's office and they've got a verse up, or they've got a little plaque that has, I can do all things through strengthens me, or something right in their office. And it's amazing how, again, I don't know how you guys do this, but that's like a signal. That's, Janice talked about signposts. That's a signpost, right? You walk into an office, you see someone with a Bible verse up. That gives you now the opening for you to have a conversation with someone about your church or your values. And so leave those signposts up, right? Let people see those signposts. Let them ask you, about that. The most important thing, the reason why it really helps is if you show your value, and when I say value, it's not worth it. I mean, it's your integrity, your values as a person. The more you let people see your values as a person, the more integrity and credibility and trust that you'll be able to build with your coworkers and your supervisors, and that will help you become more effective at work. So it's not just to try to evangelize and show you're a Christian, although that will certainly hopefully present itself at some point, but it's also to help people understand your character and your values that you hold as a person, which is very important as people try to learn to trust you.
I think it's, and I'll add to that, I think that back to where Tim was talking about building trust and credibility, if you practice a Christian work ethic in your environment where everything you do with excellence, you do it for God, right? And you don't expect anything, but that God's going to reward you at whatever date he seems to do that, then people will see that you work in a different way. Because not everybody works like that, especially if you're doing wastewater or something that's not fun. So I think in the quality of work you put out, if you're always doing your best, no matter what the task is, you will create credibility and quality. And then your witness is, what I always ask myself is, am I being a signpost? Am I pointing to Christ, or am I pointing to myself? So when I was practicing as a physical therapist, I would actually wear a cross when I was going to the hospital. I don't wear one now, right? Because I think that in my particular environment, I'm helping people who are hurt. They are very frightened sometimes. I did cardiac rehab. There was bypasses that was at DeVakey's. It was a big deal, life and death. And I felt that if I wore a simple cross, if someone wanted to talk to me and say, "Are you a Christian?" I would have an answer to that. I would be able to offer comfort. And so the attention wasn't saying, "Oh, I'm a Christian." It was, I wanted to, in the environment that I was at the time, offer people a chance to identify me and start a conversation. At school, I never wore a cross because it would cause more discontent and create enemies even before I built a relationship with someone else. And so there's no set answer. It's just, you ask yourself, what environment, at least that's what I did, am I in, that I can actually feel like I am being a good signpost. The attention isn't on me and it's causing controversy. The attention is on God, and it's going to give people an opportunity to ask me why I do the things that I do. And so, questions about, do I pray in the workroom and everybody else is, or do I, join in and whatever. I know that Tim, when he became an executive, everyone watches what he does. And, you know, he doesn't always pray now when they have meetings at lunch because there's business meetings. But I know that when we would go to company picnics, things like that, in a relaxed, non-official capacity when we brought our kids, we would always pray before we had lunch. And I remember one of your employees came in and said to you one time, I didn't know you were Christian. I saw you praying with your family at the company picnic. And we did that because it was what we did as a family when we ate. But it gives people an opportunity to ask you why you behave the way you do. But you have to build credibility by the work ethic that you practice, I guess. So those are the kind of the things that I keep in mind.
Little things.
Little.
Just do little things. Did you have a follow-up question?
Oh, I guess I should have rephrased my question better.
Sorry.
Like I guess my question was how would you like try to trust in God and at the same time try to figure out how to deal with politics going on in the office, like how to deal with people fighting each other, like still being a Christian, loving. Because this is something that made me like struggle in the past, and I also like I just didn't know how to make my boss feel comfortable, but also like not hurting other people in the office. But I do know that they are like like
drama, company drama. There's a lot of company drama, that's for sure. I always go back to prayer again, because I think that you pray for the situation. You know, you ask God for wisdom. That's always a fallback. I know it seems like a very pat answer, but every time there's a conflict that you think you're pulled into, first thing I do is I always pray. Help me to figure out what to do with this, Lord. Help me, you know, to know whether to be a part of this or not. Give me opportunities to, if that's the role you want me to play, to recognize the opportunity to step in and say something constructive, or recognize that I ought to just stay above the drama and let it sort its way out, because it has nothing to do with me and it's not going to help. My input is not going to help the situation whatsoever. So I would say pray, and pray for everybody that's part of that. Easy thing you can do specifically. And then, you know, it's specific to the circumstance, but if you know people around you, you have to earn that respect so that when you voice something, people actually want to listen to what you have to say. You know, so it's building credibility first before voicing an opinion. No one's gonna care what you say if they don't trust what you have to say, and you're just adding flames to something. It's pointless. But I think building the credibility first, you know, helps a lot.
Yeah, I would agree. Every company has politics, so you gotta understand or accept that. I mean, if you again, I was with Exxon, with Coke, with the county, I was home for two. Every company has its own politics, right? And if you think about politics and just our whole country politics, politics are different people having different beliefs and different ideas and clashing. I mean, that's what politics is. And there's no way, if any company says they don't have politics, they're lying, right? Because everyone has different beliefs or different ideas for how something should be done. And the politics is, how do you resolve that conflict? How do you figure out how to get through it? That's where some companies have, certain people who end up controlling or manipulating, things, and others have different ways to resolve that conflict, but it's all conflict resolution in terms of that politics. And so what you've got to understand is, how do you play in that role to resolve conflict. And there are people who are very good. It sounds like you, especially you can see it, right? You can see what's happening. Usually the people who are struggling the most can't see it themselves, right? And so if you can see that struggle, you know, that's good and positive, and the individuals who can actually take those observations and intervene and try to help resolve those conflicts are the ones who are gonna, you know, have that stat of points gained versus points lost when you're on the court, right? You're gonna be a team player. You're gonna be able to help the team resolve the issues. I like to call it challenge, and I like to talk about it as, instead of conflict, I like to call it challenge, because if you're sitting there, you don't agree with someone, and you don't say anything because you just don't think he'll ever listen to you or anything like that. I mean, I like to think that the absence of challenge is apathy. It's not peace. You know, a lot of people think I'm just trying to make peace. I'm just trying to keep everything quiet. But the reality is, if you see someone doing the wrong thing or something that's going to lead to the wrong result for your company, and you don't say anything, that's apathy. That's letting something happen that you know is not going to serve the company well. What you got to figure out is, how do you respectfully challenge? And that is creating a culture of challenge. But how do you create that culture? How do you make it acceptable to challenge and to ask questions without people getting offended, but at the same way trying to help resolve the conflict? Because that's what life and that's what work is all about. It's resolving differences of opinions and resolving conflict to get to a solution that everyone agrees to and can go execute. So I don't know if that helps.
So Truly, some people online have a question. Open some people online.
You have some questions texted to you from Wilson. Okay, here's a question that was submitted. What do supervisors want from me? What do supervisors want from me? This one came from Mo, I think. What do supervisors want from me? So what I think is, you know, supervisors want self-directing employees, you know, people who can figure out what needs to be done and can plot their course and can be self-directing as much as possible. The more intervention that a supervisor has to, you know, put in or intervene or put effort in, the less that supervisor is going to be able to do something else with, right? So the way I would say it is, if you're really trying to impress your supervisor, if you're really trying to make good, build trust and credibility, you want to be seen as someone who is self-directing and can figure out what needs to be done and can get it done with as little guidance and oversight from your supervisor as possible. That's just, you know, you got high attention employees and you got low attention employees, right? So that's probably the thing that I see the most, is the ones that can figure out what needs to get done and get done. And then they check in with you. They say, hey, this is what I'm doing. Let me know if it's something you don't agree with, but you're not waiting for approval. But I'm going forward. Tell me if you want me to do something different. Usually those are the employees, you know, okay, you know, they've got a path they're going forward. I don't have to worry about it. I can worry about other problems. So that's what I would say from the supervisor standpoint. Okay, pick a question. Here's another supervisor. How do I work under a supervisor that I do not think qualifies for the position? So another Mo question.
Which sort of refers to the how to build appropriate relationships with my supervisor.
Yeah, no, and I'll tell you,
That's a good question.
that's why I gave you my examples. That happens all the time, right? I mean, you know, I've had many supervisors who I did not think were the right people to be the supervisors. And through experience and through the fact that they were in the right spot at the right time, they've had that, they were put in that position. You know, the Bible says, you know, give to Caesar what, you know, you've got to respect authority. You've got to, you can't be insubordinate, right? You've got to acknowledge the law, or acknowledge the authority that's established for that particular work environment. So you may not agree with your supervisor, but if he or she is your supervisor, then he or she is still your boss, right? And the more you fight that, the worse the relationship is going to be. So, you know, not to say that you just roll over, and as Asians, we have a reputation of rolling over, right? Being very non-confrontational and just kind of accepting things. But so I'm not saying, you know, just do that, but you don't want to create conflict with your supervisor. And one of the things that I've noticed in my experiences is usually what happens is there's not a good communication process between you and your supervisor. And so it's not clear what the supervisor wants. It's not, you know, it's not clear in your mind what is, you know, what he or she's trying to do, or why you're not doing what he or she wants you to do. And so establishing what I like to call one-on-ones, which, you know, are just weekly or every other week, you know, half an hour's meeting when you sit down with the supervisor. You're telling that person, you know, kind of an update of what's happened over the last 1 or 2 weeks since you last talked, and you're getting input into that process, and then you're getting feedback and correction. That often helps with that communication gap to try to better understand what the supervisor is looking for and what the employee can do. What I've also found is the employees that think, okay, I don't want to be a burden to my supervisor, so I'm going to get everything done correct, and then I'm going to go talk to my supervisor and show them all the work that's been done at the end. It's a fallacy of you know, of what they think a good employee should do, because oftentimes what the best thing to do is to bring your supervisor along the journey of what you're doing, so you can get input along the way, so that when you get to the final conclusion or result or whatever, your supervisor has been brought along with the journey, as opposed to waiting to the very end and surprising your supervisor with the answer. And I found that oftentimes it's anti-Asian, and it's not what you intuitively would think, but because you think sometimes, well, if I get my boss's input early, it means I'm, you know, it shows a sign of weakness, or, you know, that I don't really know what's going on. But in reality, it actually it helps to align you with your supervisor early in the process, so that when you get to the end, you guys are still aligned. So that's a technique that I've used in the past that helps.
Well, and it goes back to building trust and credibility. You don't build that all the way at the end when you don't get people involved from the beginning. And it's a very Asian thing to do. We don't like to confront. We don't like to initiate conversations. We don't, because that's not what you do that's back to the next week's talk. That's not part of Asian culture to have conversations, even with your parents. And they are probably your supervisor. But if you're, you know, when you guys have families, I don't know how many of you have had deep conversations with your parents about nothing, you know? It's not something that you just pick up. It's something that you're trained to do when you're little. And then that's naturally goes over to people who are supervising over you. And if you have never done that with your parents, because the Asian family doesn't do that kind of talking, then it is very hard and it is very difficult. And you have to force yourself to do that.
Another question, how to build professional relationships. I think, we've talked about building trust and credibility, and building relationships with your coworkers professionally is very important. So how to build professional relationships is a question. I would just say, when I grew up early in my career, I brought my own lunch. I worked through lunch, in my office, and just kind of powering through. The more work I could get done, the earlier I could go home and get on with things I wanted to do. And what I would just tell you is, if there's a group of people that are going out to lunch every day, you should go out to lunch with them at least a couple times, if not every day, at least once or twice a week. You should go out to lunch. That's how you build relationships. The relationships you build don't happen in meetings, and they don't happen in, when you're in your office and they're in their office, or in cubicle and they're in their cubicle. It happens in these activities, either before work, after work, during lunch. That's when you're building relationships and building trust and credibility. So fight that tendency if you do. It was my tendency to just work in your office and not get out. It's helpful.
Well, and I think identifying the relationship in terms of importance and quality. So you have relationships with the guard when you walk into a building. You have a relationship with the custodian. Those are all professional relationships. You have a relationship with your supervisor, which is more of a ladder relationship, and then with your coworkers. And so I think when you start with something easy from the very beginning, you got to recognize all those relationships build credibility, right, and trust. When you walk in, say hello to the guard. How are you doing? That is the minimum kind of a relationship. He doesn't expect anything except courtesy and friendliness from you, and that's what you can give to them. And the more you do that, the more natural it is. And then, when you're talking about your coworkers, you're thinking, well, I've got to work with them. They've got to be successful in order for me to be successful, for us to, as a team, look good to our supervisor. And so, like Tim was saying, those times when you're on break, make an opportunity to talk to them and say, do you have a vacation? This is what we call small talk. How are your kids? Or if they got kids, or what are you doing this weekend? Again, it's outside your comfort zone, but you're beginning to build trust and credibility. And if you end up liking this coworker, invite them to go out to lunch, out to dinner one weekend. And those are things that you can do that are easy, even though there's a language barrier, to get to practice your own interpersonal skills, but then also to build relationships. And then with your supervisor, which is a completely different relationship. If you've already been practicing how to talk to the janitor and to the guard and to your coworkers, then it will be much easier for you when you're very nervous and you want to make a good impression on your supervisor to communicate, because all those things that you've been practicing in relationships that weren't as critical already become very natural. And we'll address this a little bit, I think, next week with the Asianness of it all. But these are things that your white coworkers have learned since they were little. They have been doing this since they were little, and that's why they do it so well. It's not because, white people are so much better at communicating. It's because in society, the way they're raised is so much different from the way we are raised. And their parents actually do send them into these finishing schools sometimes to teach them how to speak to people. And so this is what you have to catch up on, but you're smart and you can do it because now you're aware of what you need to do.
Jana said something earlier about, I used to consult with my dad and still do. You should know, you should have people at work who you can confide in. When you talk about building business relationships, if you feel alone at work, where you come in and you just don't feel like you have anyone you can talk to or confide in or get advice from or bounce ideas off of, then you're going to get frustrated. Yeah, you've got to have people who you can trust. They don't have to be your best friends. You don't have to do things after work, but you got to have those business relationships at work where you can talk to people and ask questions. Because oftentimes when you ask a question, someone else can provide an outside perspective of maybe something you've missed, or maybe has some information on why something's happening. It just helps to have second opinions, whether they be peers or whether they even be mentors, right? People who are above you, who could be your mentors. It's important to have people at your business who you can have a relationship and you can trust, so you can talk about concerns that you have. If you don't, it's just going to be frustrating because you won't have anyone to confide in. Okay, what is your view about AI, artificial intelligence, taking humans' jobs? If that happens,
probably not no.
If that happens, what is the value of human beings? So that's, the Terminator is coming, right? It is. I mean, it's Jonathan's got his medical degree, right? He just graduated from medical school, and he's now in the business world. But Apple, Google, they're all trying to convert as much of medical care to artificial intelligence and sensors and phones and devices. It's the Star Trek, thing that they wave over you and all of a sudden you're healed, right? That's happening. And in a couple of years, it's going to become more and more reality. So this is technology, artificial intelligence, what do they call it? Metrics and what all the terminologies they use for data processing and data, mining to try to predict the future and help you understand what's going to happen next. That's absolutely going to affect us as we keep going through this. But if you think about over time, I'm just thinking over generations, over centuries, we've been talking about machinery taking humans' jobs all the time, from the railroads to the cars, to all the, coal mines and who's that guy that was the coal miner in the history? And it's, remember that kid story?
John
Henry.
John Henry.
John Henry, anyway, we're showing our age. So we've been talking about machines taking humans' jobs for centuries. And they take those jobs, but then new jobs are created. And today, a lot of the jobs that we've had in the past no longer exist because of technology, but yet we have unemployment that is at record lows right now, right? There is still, I don't believe, as much artificial intelligence as will come. There will always be a need for human thought and for human interaction. And so I think we will become more efficient. I think we'll become more effective. I think technology we should embrace, and we got to figure out how to use it to the best of our benefits. But I personally am not worried that humans are going to become obsolete, because I think there'll always be something better that we can then focus our time and attention on than what the machines are doing.
Well, and when our kids went to one school after another, because in daytimes, a good school system teaches your children how to problem solve, because they're educating the kids for a job that does not exist. I had a principal that told me that one time. You're trying to educate our kids for jobs that don't exist when they graduate, And so this is the idea of new jobs, new technology. I agree with Tim.
Okay, last question, and then we can break for next time. But this one says, I am stuck in a job I do not like. How do I prepare for my next job? So, I mean, it's a tough situation. You should never feel trapped, right? Which a lot of people do feel. You should never feel trapped, as I talked about earlier. You know, feeling trapped is what Adam and Eve was when they sinned and were separated from God. We are not separated from God. We have that relationship with God. We should never feel like we're trapped. But it does happen. So how do we not feel trapped? How do we get out of a job that we don't like? And what I would say is, you know, first of all, you got to try to understand what is it that you don't like about your job. And the number one reason that people quit and go do something else is their supervisor. It's their direct supervisor. It's the number one reason people leave and go do something else is because of their supervisor. They'll say, you know, you'll do your survey and it'll be, you know, I got a higher paying job, or, you know, live closer to home, or I'm doing something else. But I can just tell you from experience, it's mostly because that person didn't like their supervisor. And so it happens. And so why does this happen so often? I think it's the communication we talked about earlier. You've got to really have, you know, try to understand your supervisor, try to meet with them every week or every other week to try to align, try to keep them involved early in your decision processing. But in the end, sometimes you have a supervisor that is just a bad supervisor. And sometimes you just gotta grin and bear it. Part of it is, how much time do you think this is gonna be? You know, if you're in a situation where you think this is never gonna change, this supervisor that I hate is gonna be my supervisor forever, and I don't ever see a way out from that, that's what drives people to leave. And so what I would just say is, if you're in that type of situation, there's a couple things you can do. One is you can try to find someone who you can confide in, again, a mentor or someone else who you can just talk to and trust, right? Because you don't want that person to go run to that supervisor. But you've got to be able to have someone at work who you can confide and talk to. The other thing is, you got to understand, is this situation really going to be forever, or is the situation going to change at some point? You know, when James Murray told me that I was never going to get, you know, past the department head level, I had to think through, okay, if he's controlling my future, then I'm, you know, maybe I should be leaving. But he wasn't controlling my future, and there were others, you know, who were above him. They were actually making decisions, right? And so you got to understand, is that the same situation that you're in? You may not like your supervisor, but if other people are making the decisions and you can, you know you're going to get a fair shake with them, then you can hang in there and try to just grin and bear it for a few months, for a year or two, and then hopefully get out from under that situation.
Well, and you know, while you're trying to figure that out, if you continue to work with a Christian work ethic, you know, if you are able to produce results, those are things that cannot be debated over, right? You know, I think about Tim and that wastewater job. He did a really good job with it. I mean, clearly he came in, things changed. And so everyone noticed, despite his immediate supervisor. And we prayed about it, and we decided that we were just going to see it through. And so it's not that you just sit back and not do your part, because God wants us to, everything we do excellently with our 100%, our best, as if we're working for Him. And, you know, if you feel like you need to leave jobs, well, then you need to be smart about that. You know, you look at what's going around, what is available. You need to build up a resume that will make you marketable. So it's a lot of things that you can still control, even though you're unhappy in your situation. And so you control what you can control, and you trust God with the stuff you can't control. That's what I would say.
Yeah.
So what made you leave Exxon Mobil, like after that many years? Like sometimes you say stay loyal, sometimes you say you want it, but why did you leave like Coke or something?
Yeah, it's a great question. So why did I leave Exxon after 18 years?
I call it the firm. You guys ever saw that that movie with
Tom Cruise?
Tom Cruise? Like no one leaves Exxon. They don't, because they get so much reason for, so many stocks that you have to give up a lot of money to leave Exxon. No one leaves Exxon.
There are, I don't want to say don't ever leave a company, don't ever leave the job, right? Because clearly I did it 3 or 4 times. My brother works for Exxon, by the way. He's 2 years older than me. He's a chemical engineer. My dad's a chemical engineer. My brother's a chemical engineer. My mom's a chemist.
Our daughter-in-law was a chemical engineer. Surrounded by.
So he's 2 years older than me. He still works at Exxon. He's a lifer. Most people who go to Exxon are lifers. I never thought I would leave Exxon. It was the hardest decision that I was in Canada. Our kids were going to public school in Canada. It was not good. They can sing today, to this day, they can sing the Canadian national anthem
in
French. They know all the fur traders and the history of the fur traders in Canada.
History. Very boring.
But math and science and all those things are not so much. So we were having a tough time. It was cold. Edmonton was not a good weather time.
Same attitude as Moscow.
And I had a supervisor who was basically telling me that we need you here for 2-3 more years. And so we had gotten to the point where Jonathan was in middle school, and he was getting to the point where he was going to have to go into high school. And we had told our Exxon people, we had traveled, 18 years to that point, 15 jobs, whatever, 5 different, states or continents, wherever it was. And we had basically told the company, yes to whatever they told us. And I went to my supervisor and said, okay, it's finally come. Our kids are at high school year age. Can we settle in some place so that our kids can go to high school? And the guy said, you're doing a great job. We need you here. I need you for another 2 or 3 years. And then we can move you. But, that'll be in the middle of high school. He said, what you can do is you can just move them now, send them to Fairfax, Virginia, was where the refining headquarters was. So you can plant them there. A lot of people do that. They plant their families in Fairfax, Virginia, and then they commute. And so you can do that. Yeah, and then the longest commute that was going on at the time was a guy who was commuting from Japan, and his family was in Fairfax.
Yes, I didn't hear any of that.
And it was, I think it was once a month he got a conjugal visit home or something, right? It was something like that. So we talked about it. It wasn't something that we ever thought of doing, because we'd always thought that Exxon was where we were going to be with. But a headhunter called me and said, hey, we want you to come join Koch Industries. And for about 6 months, we ignored the guy and just said, no, not interested. How can you beat what we got, right? And so this guy was persistent, and in fact, a guy from Koch, his name was Jim Mahoney, who started getting involved and started building a relationship with me. So he ended up being my supervisor. And he would call me and just tell me and explain what was going on, why they needed me, why they were interested in me. And after about 6 months of listening to what he was telling me, there was life after Exxon, and here's why, you know, you can come out here. And my supervisor telling me, you know, you're gonna be here for 2 or 3 more years, and you're not gonna, you know, your kids aren't gonna be able to, you know, have continuity through high school. We said, well, let's at least see if it's true. You know, let's at least see if what he's talking about is really true. And so over the next 3 or 4 months, there were discussions, and I actually went out and visited them in Wichita. And each time I started feeling like, okay, maybe this is true. Finally made the decision, left Exxon. They did not react well at all. I mean, this was, you know, they threw lawyers at me. They were trying to, you know, get me to pay back a lot of different, you know, bonuses and things that they had provided. It was the firm kind of thing going on. And this was 2008. If you remember, 2008 is when the Great Recession occurred. And so I moved, went to Wichita, and within a month, the Great Recession occurred. And I remember, you know, for a year going back to Janice every night going, what did we just do? We just left, you know, the largest public company in the United States with the strongest balance sheet that could withstand any kind of recession like we're going through now. And I moved to an unknown company, and I was sitting in the board meetings, and they were talking about not meeting their debt covenants and not being able to, you know, survive and what they were going to do. And it was like, what did I just do? I gave up, you know, the bird in the hand and chased this, you know, kind of dream. The grass is always greener kind of dream, right? And that happened for about a year. I think, you know, there were many nights where we would say, what did we do? And again, cry out to God and say, what, you know, or what's happening here? What do you, why did you bring us here? You know, are we following you? So there's a lot of second guessing. But I tell people what I learned at Coke, what I told you guys about being in that boardroom, listening to a guy named Charles Coke, and understanding how he thinks and how he runs his business. I learned more in the 7 years I was at Coke than I had learned in the 18 years I was with Exxon. And I had become stronger as a result in my own development in terms of making that move than I would have ever learned and grown if I stayed at Exxon. And when Calumet asked me to be their CEO, they told me, if you had stayed at Exxon, you would not be qualified to be the CEO. We would not be asking you to be the CEO. And if you stayed at Coke the whole time, we would not have asked you to be the CEO. But that combined experience is what has shaped who you are today and allowed you to do this. So we tell people that leaving Exxon was the biggest decision of our lives. And I can honestly look back now and say it was also the best decision of our careers. And so that's not to say everyone should do that. It's not to say everyone should, you know, should jump ship and leave. My brother is staying with Exxon. He's having a great career. You know, it's just, you've got to understand again, why are you wanting and doing what you want and asking for? Is it for you? Is it for God? Is it for your family? What is motivating you? Are you glorifying God?
The faith thing behind that is I had an agreement with Tim when we got married that I would go wherever he wanted to go. You know, we're a team. And so he dragged me, we were like a nomad through all these places, and I was fine with that. It was a lot of, you know, we make lemonade, you know, enjoy where you are and trust God. But we'd always said that our children are going to come back to the U.S. and go through high school and middle school in the U.S. They're going to know what it means to be an American. Because, you know, the expat life is kind of tough. Some kids are Americans, but they don't know what football is because they've lived their whole life in Singapore, you know, and it's a sense of identity. So part of that is we made a he was a promise keeper. We made a promise because to our family. And so when it became clear that we were not coming back to the US anytime soon, and then, Tim sacrificed his word. He's been very nice about that. But he said, well, then clearly I can't stay at this company because we can't mess up raising our children. That's something you can never go back from. And so there were a lot of nights we just prayed. We're committed to making sure our children are raised properly in the US where they're going to be happy. Because you're going to US colleges, they have to know US history. They can't just be all Canadian stuff. That's crazy. And God provided Coke. And headhunters were always calling him all the time. And he always ignored them, because it is what it is. But this one persistent headhunter kept saying, well, was the only person he ever called back. And it was, the timing was perfect when we thought, okay, Lord, we're going to prioritize our family and our relationship over career. I believe God created this opportunity for us to leave, but we had to do a step of faith. And we went through all the channels. We asked our parents, we asked our, people we trusted and said, what do y'all think? And they kind of said we were crazy, actually. It was very Asian. You got this good job. What are you doing? But because of all these circumstances, we felt that God was leading us to go ahead and leave and trust him with the results.
So we went to Wichita. Our kids got involved with a group called Young Life, which is a Christian organization that is part of the high schools and the junior highs. And we had never participated in Young Life in our growing up, but we saw the impact that it was having on our kids. We got involved with Young Life while we were in Wichita. I ended up joining their board and was the chair of their board in Wichita, helping them grow in the area. And so that was, we can see God's purpose in bringing us to Wichita. The same person who first befriended Jonathan when he just started, all alone in junior high school when he first arrived. His name's Matt Shepard. He ended up, being the, as I chaired, he ended up being, he was the director of Young Life. And so we got very close in terms of our relationship. He just married Jonathan and his and Christy, last December, which was exciting. He also baptized them the day before the wedding. And so you just see the thread. Again, I told you, you can't make this up, right? I mean, we couldn't have created these storylines ourselves, but God, you just let God kind of lead you. And who would have ever guessed that by leaving Exxon, going to Wichita, we would have gotten this relationship with Young Life and Matt Shepard, who was, being the pastor who married our son and actually baptized our son and daughter the day before. It's just a neat way that, again, God works in mysterious ways.
A side note, and we'll move on, but Jonathan and Caroline are not baptized. Well, Jonathan is now. They accepted Christ when they were children, but we get bopping from church to church to church. And, we got close to baptizing them, but then we moved. It was something or another. And I was really concerned. We actually wanted to get them baptized here in Dallas before we left, but their children's program said you had to be 12 to be baptized, which, I have issue with that, but that, it's fine. But now I see that Jonathan was waiting to be baptized with his wife. And she accepted Christ as a freshman at the University of Texas. And it was a testimony to her family and had a whole family that did not know anything about Jesus Christ. So the whole family came for the wedding and they gave their testimony, and she gave her testimony on why Jesus. And then they were baptized. So I was telling Tim that it's like, well, this is knows why he was never baptized? You know, and there's where we see God's thread. Who would have known? And we couldn't have made this up if we tried.
Thank you guys for sticking with us. I know it's late. Let's maybe call it a night and we can start up again next time. But do I turn it back over to you?
No, I think we should be okay.
Okay. Okay, thanks everyone.
Okay, come back next week. I'm going to bring you some of those bricks. I can try the bricks I got one.
We have a dessert outside.
Okay.